The night air was heavy, thick with the quiet hum of the evening. Rachel sat alone at her kitchen table, the pale glow of her phone casting a faint light over her face. She scrolled absently through yet another profile, another face that promised adventure and connection, only to fall flat with a swipe left. She sighed, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment pressing down on her. Another match, another brief conversation, and no real connection. This was the fourth app she'd tried in 6 months, each one more exhausting than the last. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she pondered what had led her here. The endless parade of faces and brief exchanges that felt so hollow. She wasn't looking for anything serious, not really, not yet. But she was tired of the fake smiles, the exaggerated bias, the men who seemed like perfect matches until they opened their mouths. She just wanted someone who understood her, someone who could look past the surface and see who she really was. She was about to close the app when something caught her eye. A profile stood out among the others. His name was Mark, his profile polished but not overdone. A handsome, confident smile flashed from the screen, paired with a tagline that read, "Looking for deep connections and a little adventure." His eyes twinkled in the photos, genuine, not like the carefully staged smiles of others. His bio was simple, mentioning a love for hiking, philosophy, and travel. It felt real, not scripted. She hesitated for only a moment before swiping right. The match notification popped up almost instantly. A small thrill surged through her chest. It had been a while since anyone had caught her attention like this. Moments later, his first message appeared. "Hey Rachel, I couldn't help but notice your love for hiking. Ever been to Yosemite? It's one of my favorite places." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She'd mentioned hiking on her profile, but this was different. It wasn't just a generic pickup line. It was a personal touch, something that made her feel seen. She felt a warmth spread through her chest as she typed her reply. "I haven't been to Yosemite yet, but it's on my list. I've heard it's incredible. Do you go often?" The excitement that stirred in her chest made her fingers tremble slightly as she hit send. She didn't expect a reply right away. But seconds later, a response flashed on the screen. "I try to go a couple of times a year. I find it grounding, you know. There's something about the silence and the view from the top that makes everything else seem small. It puts things in perspective." Her smile deepened. He was different. She could feel the pull of curiosity as they exchanged a few more messages. What started as small talk about hiking quickly evolved into deeper conversations about art, books, and travel. Rachel found herself opening up more than she intended. She shared things she hadn't told anyone in years, and somehow, Mark seemed to understand, truly understand, what she was saying. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix things, but simply listened. It was a welcome change. The next few days were a whirlwind of late-night messages, each conversation more engaging than the last. They discussed everything from their shared love of philosophy to their dreams of one day traveling the world together. It felt easy, too easy, almost like they'd known each other forever. Rachel found herself daydreaming during the day about their late-night talks. He was charming, articulate, and, above all, made her feel important. But as the days went by, something began to niggle at the back of Rachel's mind. It wasn't a full-blown suspicion, just a slight sense of unease that grew with each passing conversation. Mark's messages were always full of warmth and humor, but there was something off about the way he danced around meeting in person. They'd discussed meeting several times, but each time, Mark had a reason for why it couldn't happen. At first, it seemed harmless. "I've got a last-minute business trip this weekend," he'd said one time. Another day, "A family emergency just came up, I won't be able to make it." She understood, life happened. But as the days turned into weeks, Rachel began to notice a pattern. Each time they planned to meet, something would come up to keep them apart. A sudden illness. A work crisis. The excuses seemed to flow easily, too easily. The doubt crept in slowly, but it was there, lingering in the back of her mind. Was he just busy, or was he avoiding her? She couldn't tell. Maybe she was overthinking things. She told herself it was probably nothing, just the unpredictability of life. But the more it happened, the harder it became to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After what felt like the 100th cancellation, Rachel reached her breaking point. She stared at her phone in frustration, her thumb hovering over the screen. It had been months since their first conversation, and they were still stuck in the limbo of endless texting. The thought of it made her feel like she was just wasting time. That night, she made a decision. She couldn't keep going like this, waiting for Mark to finally find time for her, only to be met with empty promises. She would take the plunge and meet him in person, once and for all. No more delays, no more excuses. She typed out a message, "I'm free this weekend. Let's finally meet up, no more cancellations." A few minutes passed before Mark replied. "How about we meet at the lake? There's a quiet spot by the water, away from the crowds. It's peaceful, just us. What do you think?" Rachel's hesitation lasted only a second. The idea of meeting him in a serene, secluded spot appealed to her. She'd always loved the calm of the water. She typed her reply quickly, "Sounds perfect. I'll meet you there." The plan was set. For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt a wave of excitement rush through her. She was finally going to meet Mark. No more screens between them. She could already imagine the conversation flowing effortlessly, the chemistry they shared online translating into real life. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the beginning of something special. Rachel arrived at the lake just before sunset. The sky was painted in soft hues of pink and orange, the air cool and calming. She parked her car near the edge of the lot, the gravel crunching under her tires as she stepped out. The lake stretched out before her, the water gleaming in the fading light. She spotted him immediately. Mark was standing at the water's edge, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He looked just like his photos, tall, confident, with the same warm smile that had drawn her in from the start. When he saw her, his face lit up, and he walked toward her, his steps easy and relaxed. "Hey, Rachel," he greeted her, extending his hand. "It's so good to finally meet you in person." She shook his hand, smiling in return. "It's good to meet you too, Mark. I've been looking forward to this." They stood there for a moment, taking in the view. The lake was calm, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. It felt right, peaceful. The tension she had felt earlier began to melt away as they fell into easy conversation. They talked about their favorite books, their shared love for nature, and their plans for the future. Rachel found herself laughing freely, the weight of the last few weeks lifting off her shoulders. After a while, Mark suggested, "How about we go boating? I know a spot on the lake where we can just float and relax." "It'll be perfect." Rachel hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure about the idea of being out on the water at dusk, but something about Mark's calm demeanor put her at ease. She smiled. "Sure, that sounds nice." They walked together toward a small rowboat tied to a dock just beyond the shoreline. Mark helped her into the boat before climbing in himself. As he began to row, the boat glided smoothly across the water, the soft sound of the oars cutting through the calm surface. Rachel let out a contented sigh, enjoying the quiet. The cool breeze ruffled her hair, and she leaned back, feeling the gentle sway of the boat beneath her. She glanced over at Mark, who was focused on steering, his gaze steady and calm. "This is nice," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. "I don't think I've ever felt so relaxed." Mark smiled, glancing over at her. "I'm glad you're enjoying it. I come out here a lot, just to get away from everything." It's nice to be alone with your thoughts. They continued to drift across the lake, the sun sinking lower and lower. Rachel could feel herself relaxing, letting her guard down for the first time in a long while. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a real connection. Maybe Mark wasn't just another guy from an online profile. Maybe he was the one. The boat continued its slow, steady journey across the water. Everything felt perfect. But as they neared the far side of the lake, something shifted. Mark's hand shifted on the oars, guiding the boat toward a hidden dock. Rachel's brow furrowed as she looked ahead. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tight with unease. Mark smiled reassuringly, but there was something in his eyes that made her stomach tighten. "I want to show you something special," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. The boat slowed as they approached the dock, and Rachel's unease grew, gnawing at her gut. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but she brushed it aside. It was just nerves, she told herself. After all, Mark seemed harmless enough. He helped her out of the boat, his touch gentle, and led her toward a small cabin in the distance. The air felt heavier now, the light dimming as the last traces of sunset faded away. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure why, but she suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. There was something she couldn't put her finger on, something off about the way Mark had guided the boat toward this secluded spot. Still, she followed him. Every step felt heavier than the last. Rachel's feet faltered slightly as she stepped over the threshold of the cabin, the creak of the door sounding louder than it should have. The air inside was cool and damp, and the smell of aged wood and dust lingered in the back of her throat. Mark held the door open for her with a smile that still seemed welcoming, though it felt different now, more intense. She glanced back at the lake, where the soft ripples had once seemed serene, and her unease grew as she crossed the threshold. There was something in her gut telling her to stop, to turn around and leave, but she ignored it. It was just nerves, she convinced herself. Just nerves. It wasn't as though she hadn't seen this type of thing before, being alone with someone new, in an unfamiliar place. She just had to shake it off. The cabin was sparse, old furniture scattered across the room, its surfaces dusty and forgotten. A flickering light bulb above her cast long shadows, creating dark corners that seemed to grow deeper the longer she stood still. The floor beneath her feet was uneven, the wood creaking under her weight as she moved further into the space. The silence felt almost suffocating, and as the wind outside howled against the wooden walls, Rachel could almost feel it seeping into her bones. "Make yourself comfortable," Mark said as he walked ahead, his voice too casual for the setting. The smile still hadn't faded, but there was a hardness to it now, something unfamiliar. Rachel rubbed her arms, trying to shake off the cold, and scanned the room with growing discomfort. The walls were lined with photographs, each one more faded than the last. Old family portraits, people Rachel didn't recognize. They all stared out at her from their frames, their eyes too intense, too focused. She tried to look away, but the faces seemed to haunt her, lingering in the periphery of her vision. "Isn't this place great?" Mark's voice snapped her out of her reverie. He stood by a set of large windows, gazing out at the view. His back was to her, and for the first time, Rachel noticed something strange about the way he held himself. The tension in his shoulders was tight, rigid. The room was so quiet now, too quiet, and Rachel's thoughts started to race. Was it just nerves, or was she really being foolish? Her eyes flicked toward the corners of the room again, and the cold chill that ran down her spine refused to let go. She felt watched. No, not watched, she felt observed, like a subject under a microscope. Every instinct told her that something was terribly off. The old furniture. The dark corners. The photos. "Are you all right?" Mark's voice broke through her thoughts, and she saw him turning back toward her, that same smile stretched across his face. I'm fine, she said, a little too quickly. She cleared her throat and tried to act casual, but her heart rate had picked up, and she could feel the sweat building on her palms. The silence stretched on. Rachel took a step forward, her eyes still darting around the room, trying to make sense of it. But there was no pattern, no logic to the way the cabin was laid out, and the feeling of disorientation only deepened. Mark seemed oblivious to her unease. He took a seat on the couch, patting the spot next to him, gesturing for her to join him. His eyes twinkled, but Rachel wasn't fooled. She wasn't sure why, but she just couldn't shake the growing sense that she shouldn't be here. That this wasn't a simple date. She wanted to leave. She wanted to go home. But her legs felt heavy, and for some reason, her feet didn't move. She stood there, frozen, watching Mark as he settled more comfortably into the couch, stretching his legs out in a lazy manner. "Everything okay, Rachel?" He tilted his head slightly, his voice now laced with something sharper. Her response came out too quickly again. "Yeah. I'm just thinking." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. For a moment, everything was still, except for the faraway sounds of the wind outside, the rattling of the windows in their frames. And then, as if responding to her silence, Mark stood up abruptly, his posture stiffening. "I'll be right back," he said, his words clipped, not the tone of someone retreating to the kitchen to grab a drink but something more commanding. Rachel didn't say anything, only watched him disappear through a door at the back of the cabin. Alone now, Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She took a cautious step deeper into the cabin, closer to the pictures on the wall. There were so many of them, each one seemingly older than the last, their edges curling slightly, as if the time had taken its toll on them. The faces blurred together as she moved from one frame to another, each person with a quiet stare that unnerved her further. But then something stopped. A photo of a woman. Rachel stopped in her tracks, staring at the faded photograph. There was something about her, something so familiar. The woman had dark hair, pale skin, and an intense gaze that seemed to reach right through Rachel. The sense of recognition hit her like a jolt of electricity. She knew that face. But where had she seen it? The photograph looked old, worn, like it belonged to someone who had been dead for decades. She felt her stomach tighten as she leaned in closer, studying the details. That's when she heard the faint creak of floorboards. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Mark stood in the doorway, watching her with a steady, almost predatory look in his eyes. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, but there was an edge to it now, a subtle threat she couldn't ignore. Rachel took a step back, away from the photo. "Yeah, just looking around," she said, her voice shaky. She forced herself to smile, but it was too late. Mark had already noticed her unease. Without a word, Mark stepped closer, and his hand reached out to rest on her arm, his fingers lingering longer than they should have. The touch was cold, calculating. Her body tensed immediately, and her breath caught in her throat. She tried to pull away, but he didn't let go, not yet. "You're not the first, Rachel." Mark's voice was suddenly low, almost a whisper, and a chill ran down her spine. "There's been many before you, and there will be many after you." Her breath stopped altogether. She turned her head, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from his eyes, which had turned hard, cold. His smile, once so charming, was now replaced with something darker, something far more sinister. "You thought this was just a date, didn't you?" he continued, the words slipping out like they were rehearsed, like they'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "I'm not who I said I was. I don't want a relationship, Rachel. I want to watch you suffer." Fear hit her like a hammer to the chest. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't obey. Her mind raced in panic, but she was rooted to the spot, her legs unable to move. Mark's lips curled into a smirk as he pulled his hand away. But instead of retreating, he walked across the room with slow, deliberate steps, heading towards a small cabinet by the wall. He opened it and retrieved something. Rachel's pulse quickened when she saw it, a coil of thick rope, hanging loosely in his hand. The breath left her lungs. He wasn't just playing with her. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a bad joke. She was trapped. Mark turned back around, his eyes never leaving hers. The rope swayed slightly in his hand as he stepped toward her again. The silence in the cabin felt deafening now, oppressive. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, and her legs still wouldn't move. The weight of his gaze pressed down on her. And then, as though sensing her vulnerability, Mark smiled again. This time, it was colder, harder. "You're not going anywhere." With a swift motion, he turned and locked the door behind him. The sharp click of the bolt echoed in the room. Rachel's world spun as the sound of the lock sinking home drilled into her mind. She rushed to the door, yanking at the handle, her fingers slipping as the panic set in. The door wouldn't budge. She pounded her fists against it, screaming for help, but there was no one to hear her. Mark's laughter echoed behind her, low and mocking, sending a shiver up her spine. Her thoughts were racing, but they were clouded by the urgency of the situation. There had to be a way out. She couldn't let him win. A sudden movement caught her eye. She turned to the window, her last hope. The small window across the room stood open slightly, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. She ran toward it, desperate. But as her fingers reached for the latch, she saw Mark already standing between her and the escape. He had beaten her to it. She was trapped. Rachel's heart pounded violently in her chest as Mark's grip tightened around her wrist. She yanked and twisted, her body fighting against his unyielding strength, but his fingers were like iron, clamped around her wrist with a force that sent jolts of panic through her system. She could feel the sweat on her forehead, her palms slick with fear, as she struggled to break free. Every pull only seemed to make his hold firmer, his eyes watching her with an unsettling calm that made her skin crawl. "Let me go," Rachel gasped, her voice a strained whisper, as she tried again to free herself. But Mark's hold didn't falter. "Relax," he said, his voice low, too calm. "You're not going anywhere." Her mind was a whirlwind of panic. This is it, she thought, her stomach dropping as a cold, undeniable truth settled in. Mark wasn't just some man she'd misjudged. He wasn't a harmless flirt who had gotten too attached. He was a predator, and she was his prey. Every muscle in her body screamed for escape. But she felt powerless, the weight of the situation crushing down on her. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in, the air thick with the suffocating stillness of her surroundings. She could barely hear her own ragged breathing over the sound of her pulse thrumming in her ears. Her legs felt unsteady, like they might give way at any moment. "Stop fighting, Rachel," Mark said again, his grip tightening further, pulling her closer to him. His smile was tight now, like a mask barely holding back something much darker. "You're only making this harder for yourself." Desperation clawed at her, sharp and unforgiving. She had to get away, she had to. Her mind raced, every thought a tangled mess of possible escape plans. But there was nothing. The cabin was isolated, the windows barred, and the door locked. Nothing she did seemed to make the slightest difference. Every move she made was met with his unyielding strength, his grip tightening with every passing second. She couldn't get free. "You're trapped." The realization came crashing down, cold and final. She could feel the weight of the thought in her bones. The cabin, this remote, hidden place, was her prison, and Mark was the warden. There was nowhere to run, no one to hear her. This wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. And now, she was caught in it. Her hands trembled as she fought to maintain some semblance of control. "Think," she told herself. "You've got to think." A faint sound broke through the chaos in her mind, the soft rustling of the wind outside. She glanced toward the window, her heart seizing in her chest as she noticed it. The window. It was slightly ajar. A rush of relief surged through her, but it was quickly followed by doubt. Would it be enough? Could she get there before Mark saw? Without giving herself time to second-guess, she yanked her wrist from his grip, her body moving on pure instinct as she rushed toward the window. She could feel the burn in her legs as she ran, her pulse roaring in her ears. But as she neared the opening, she felt Mark's hand on her shoulder, his fingers digging into her skin with a force that made her gasp. "No," she whispered, panicking as his grip tightened around her, pulling her back from the window. In that moment, Rachel knew her only chance was slipping away. She had to get that window open, now. "Mark, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling, though she barely recognized it as her own. "I just want to leave. I won't tell anyone, I swear." But Mark only chuckled, a low, cold sound that made Rachel's blood run cold. "You're not going anywhere, Rachel. You're mine now." She could feel her stomach twist in terror as she tried again to pull away, but his grip was like iron, immovable, unrelenting. She could sense the moment when he decided to stop playing with her. His expression shifted, the amusement draining from his face, replaced by something far darker. He stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he picked up the coil of rope he had brought earlier. Rachel's breath caught. This was it, this was the moment when things turned. The knot in her stomach tightened, her limbs frozen with fear. He wasn't just playing. He wasn't just messing around anymore. He was going to bind her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she felt a surge of adrenaline course through her. She had to do something, anything. There was no more time for reasoning. This wasn't a game. This was life and death. With a quick, desperate motion, she grabbed the coil of rope, her fingers trembling. Mark's eyes flicked toward her, and for the briefest moment, his amusement flickered again. He hadn't expected her to take the rope. But that wasn't the moment Rachel cared about. It wasn't his surprise that mattered. Her arm swung with everything she had, the rope slashing through the air toward him. She hit him across the face with a crack that echoed through the cabin. Mark stumbled back, his hand flying to his cheek, but Rachel didn't wait. She didn't think. She didn't give him a chance to recover. In that fleeting second of freedom, Rachel felt a flicker of hope, a spark of something she hadn't felt since she had walked into this nightmare. She could do this. She could escape. But as the rope fell from her trembling hands, Mark's laugh cut through the room like a blade. He wiped the blood from his lip with his fingers and looked at her, his smile now twisted with amusement and something darker, something colder. "You really think you can stop me?" he sneered, stepping forward slowly. "You can't even touch me." His voice was low, menacing, and Rachel's stomach dropped. The dread that had been simmering in her chest flared up, consuming her in an instant. She had made a mistake. She'd thought she had control for a moment. But she didn't. Mark wasn't just stronger than her, he was smarter. He had been playing her the entire time, pulling the strings while she struggled, thinking she could escape. The laughter died, replaced by a cold, calculated fury. Mark stepped closer again, his gaze fixed on her. Rachel's chest tightened with terror, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. She wouldn't go down without a fight. Without warning, she launched herself at him, her body flying forward with everything she had left. She aimed for his chest, hoping to knock him off balance, hoping to catch him by surprise. The collision was brutal. They both hit the floor hard, the impact rattling the cabin, but Rachel didn't hesitate. She fought with every last bit of energy she had, her fists pounding against him, her feet kicking, her nails digging into his skin. The struggle was wild, frantic, a blur of limbs and desperate gasps for air. Mark grunted beneath her, his hands grabbing at her arms, trying to push her off. But Rachel refused to let go. She clawed at him, trying to find any weakness, any opening. Every movement felt like life or death. Every second was another chance to break free, another chance to live. But Mark wasn't a man to be subdued easily. His grip on the rope tightened, and with one swift motion, he forced it around Rachel's wrist, pulling her close, tightening it until she couldn't breathe. Her eyes went wide with panic. This was it. She had to do something. She kicked with all her might, pushing him off balance, and for a moment, she thought she might have a chance. She was up. She was moving. But then, before she could take a step, Mark grabbed her ankle, pulling her down again. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his grip on her leg was unrelenting. No, Rachel screamed, her heart hammering in her chest as he dragged her back to the floor. Let me go. But Mark didn't listen. He had her now. He wasn't letting go. Not this time. As they struggled, Rachel's eyes caught something, a shift in the corner of the cabin. A small indentation in the floor, a slight gap in the wood. Her heart skipped a beat. Is that it? There, hidden beneath the clutter of furniture, was a passageway. A way out. But she was running out of time. Mark was closer than ever, his hands closing around her once more. With a surge of desperation, Rachel pushed herself toward the passageway, but there was something blocking it. A large beam, heavy and immovable. She dug her fingers into the wood, her hands slipping in the cold sweat that covered them. No. I can't, not going anywhere, Rachel. Mark's voice came from behind her, low and dangerous. She heard his footsteps getting closer, and her heart slammed against her ribs. She shoved harder, but the beam wouldn't move. The sound of his approach grew louder. Mark reached for her again. This was her last chance. Please, God. Desperation clawed at her as she struggled with everything left in her. She could feel the sweat stinging her eyes. One last push. One last try. But the beam didn't budge. And then, with a sudden, sickening realization, she felt Mark's hand on her shoulder. The game was over. Rachel sat on the cold floor of the cabin, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her hands shook as they pressed against the ground, trying to steady herself. The exhaustion was overwhelming, and every breath she took felt like it might be her last. Her face was pale, drained by the hours, maybe days, of fear, but there was a hollow quality in her eyes that couldn't be disguised. The bright fire of terror had long since faded, replaced by a numbness she couldn't shake. She was broken, but not completely. Mark stood in front of her, his cruel smile never leaving his face. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he surveyed the wreckage of her spirit, delighting in her fear. He paced in front of her, savoring the moment. I have to admit, Rachel, you put up quite a fight, he taunted, his voice laced with mockery. But in the end, it's always the same, isn't it? You think you can win, but you can't. You're mine. Rachel's breath hitched in her throat. The weight of the words crashed over her, but somewhere beneath the suffocating fear, a small flicker of defiance ignited. Mark's words cut into her like a knife, but they couldn't take everything from her. Not yet. The sweat on her brow glistened as she forced herself to focus. This isn't over, she told herself. You're still alive. You can still fight. It was a whisper of hope, but it was enough to stir something deep inside her, a fight she thought she had lost. Mark continued his slow pacing, the sound of his boots on the wooden floor echoing in the otherwise silent cabin. You really thought you could escape me, didn't you? He leaned down toward her, his breath hot against her ear. You're nothing but a game, Rachel. A toy to me. And toys don't get to leave. His voice sent another shudder through her, but Rachel fought it down, focusing instead on the strength building inside her. She could feel it, surging beneath the layers of fear and exhaustion. Her hands clenched into fists, and though her body was weak, her mind was sharper than ever. Mark had made a fatal mistake. He underestimated her. She scanned the room. Her eyes moved quickly, desperately seeking any sign of something, anything, that could give her a chance to break free. Think, she commanded herself. She couldn't let fear cloud her judgment. The room seemed so simple, but every object in it could be a weapon, a tool. And then, she saw it. A rusted metal wrench, carelessly left on a table in the corner of the room. It wasn't much, but it was something heavy, something she could use. Her pulse quickened as she locked onto the object, her mind racing through possibilities. Mark was still pacing, still savoring his victory, completely unaware of the spark of defiance that had reignited inside her. Rachel's breath quickened as she pulled herself up from the floor, moving toward the table. She had to be quick. Every movement she made now could be her last, but she couldn't afford to hesitate. She grabbed the wrench, the cold metal digging into her palm. The weight of it was comforting in her hand. It wasn't much, but it was her weapon. Mark's back was to her as he continued to gloat. Rachel's eyes narrowed, and without a second thought, she swung the wrench toward him with all her remaining strength. The impact was sickening, a dull thud as the wrench collided with his skull. Mark staggered backward, his eyes wide in shock. Blood started to seep from the gash on his forehead, staining his hand as he instinctively pressed it to the wound. Rachel didn't wait. She didn't have time to see if her blow had done enough damage. With adrenaline flooding her system, she bolted for the door. Mark's voice exploded in fury behind her, but she didn't look back. Her heart thundered in her chest as she threw open the door, the cold night air slapping her face like a hard truth. She stumbled out into the woods, the sound of Mark's enraged shouts chasing her, but she didn't stop. Her feet pounded against the ground, each step carrying her further from the cabin, further from Mark. She didn't care how much it hurt. She had to run. She had to get away. The night air cut through her, biting at her skin, but she didn't slow down. The woods were dark, the trees looming around her like silent sentinels, but Rachel pushed through the fear, her legs moving faster, harder, each breath a desperate gasp. Ahead, she saw the clearing. The lake. She could make it there, she had to. She could hear Mark's footsteps crashing through the brush behind her, the sound growing closer, but she didn't dare look back. She just ran, faster than she ever thought possible. The lake was in sight now, and Rachel's heart surged with hope. She knew that it was her only chance, get to the dock, get to the boat, and get away. It was her final shot. She reached the dock, breathless, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the oars. The cold air seemed to burn her lungs, but she couldn't stop now. She could still hear Mark's footsteps behind her, crashing through the brush, getting closer. Her hands were slick with sweat as she grasped the oars, her fingers slipping, but she didn't hesitate. With one final, frantic push, she shoved the boat away from the dock, throwing herself into it with desperate urgency. She took the oars in her hands, her arms shaking as she rowed with all her might. The boat lurched forward, cutting through the dark water of the lake. Rachel's arms burned with exertion, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She didn't look back. She could still hear Mark's enraged shouts, but the distance between them grew with each stroke. She rowed harder, faster, her body screaming in protest, but her will was stronger. She had to get away. The sounds of Mark's pursuit grew faint, his shouts becoming muffled by the distance, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel allowed herself to breathe. But she didn't stop rowing. She couldn't. As she rowed, the weight of her fear began to lift, replaced by something else, relief. She was getting away. She was alive. And she was free. It felt like an eternity, but finally, after what seemed like hours, Rachel reached the opposite shore. Her arms were numb, her muscles screaming with exhaustion, but she didn't care. She collapsed onto the soft grass, gasping for breath, her heart still pounding in her chest. She was alive. She was free. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't care. She pressed her hands to the ground, trying to ground herself, to remind herself that she had made it. She had escaped. With trembling hands, she pushed herself to her feet. She couldn't stop now. She had to find help. She stumbled forward, her body unsteady beneath her, but she kept moving. The road had to be nearby. She didn't know how far, but she couldn't stop. It took what felt like forever, but eventually, she saw headlights in the distance. A car. Her heart leaped in her chest, and she waved frantically, desperate, pleading. The car slowed, the driver rolling down the window, concern flashing across their face. "Please," Rachel gasped, her voice hoarse. "I need help. Please." The driver didn't hesitate. They immediately dialed the police, and Rachel, weak with relief, collapsed against the car. Her body was trembling uncontrollably, but she was safe. The nightmare was over. As the police arrived and the officers took control, Rachel sank into the back of the car, her body still trembling with the weight of everything that had happened. She closed her eyes, exhausted, knowing that it was finally over. She was free.